This founder couldn't crack the Instagram algorithm, so we built him a strategy that doubled his audience in 60 days. And this video is going to be a full step-by-step breakdown on how we did it. So this is Kevin Zhu. He's the founder of AfterHour, which is a social trading / investing platform which raised $4.5 million in its first equity funding. He's also the founder of Alpha AI, which is your own AI investing assistant, which basically goes into your portfolio and helps you invest, right? And he was able to gain a lot of popularity when he turned $35,000 into $10 million, documenting all of it through a series of swing trades. And with this, he built a lot of rapport on platforms like Twitter and Reddit. Twitter, he grew to over 155,000 followers, and Reddit around 60,000 followers. But despite all of this, he wasn't really able to build that much of a large audience on Instagram. So that's where my team came in to help him build a stronger presence on Instagram, showing his journey as a founder, right? And the main purpose of this was generally to help him become more known so he could utilize public media to promote and expand his startups. So being able to grow on Instagram and other social media platforms allowed him to attract potential investors, drive more users to his apps, open doors to speaking opportunities and media features, and ultimately build the kind of portfolio that just makes everything in business easier. So now I'm going to go over how we managed to scale him to over 25,000 followers on Instagram, opening tons of doors and opportunities to build his audience and grow his startup. Now, when we first started working with him, obviously the first thing we did was identify what his ICP was. And we were able to structure this based off of his main goals. So his first goal was to build an audience of retail investors, basically just people who invest in the stock market, who can learn about Kevin's knowledge in the markets and start using his apps, so AfterHour and Alpha AI. His second goal was to become a thought leader on Instagram in order to expand his influence into speaking events, podcasts, media opportunities, etc. So basically the second goal was to build enough influence on Instagram so he could be seen as an authority, which would allow him to get onto more podcasts, media, to promote his tool, etc. And with that knowledge, we were able to develop his main ICP statement. And what this was retail investors and industry professionals who are actively building wealth, following the markets, and looking to connect with and learn from credible founders who spread his awareness in the investing space. Now, breaking down this ICP into smaller fractions, so the first in the groups of people that we're kind of targeting with this were retail investors and industry professionals. So we targeted these groups specifically because they were the most natural fit for his existing credibility that he already built on other platforms and with his investing journey. So, retail investors are the people who would directly benefit from his products, so AfterHour and Alpha AI, and industry professionals, so founders, operators, journalists, podcast hosts, and investors in general, are the kind of people who would amplify his presence, invite him into rooms, so speaking events, and accelerate the kind of growth of brands that goes beyond, just your follower counts on Instagram. It builds your presence much bigger than just these social media platforms. Now, the second part of his ICP is obviously actively building wealth and following the market. So that's a trait of the people. So this is the core pain point and passion that unites both of these groups together. So the retail investors and the industry professionals. So whether someone is a retail investor tracking their portfolio or a professional in the space, the market is something that people spend so much time trying to keep up with every single day. So Kevin's story of $35,000 to $10 million speaks directly to their desire of building a strong portfolio. And what really differentiated him is that he didn't just talk about recommendations or talk about stocks in general, is he literally said exactly what stocks he was buying into at what time. He was fully transparent. And now the third part of his ICP was looking to connect with and learn from founders shaping the investing space. Because like I said, there are a lot of finance creators out there that can talk about stocks and wealth building. But there are very few people who have built companies and made real money in the markets that are willing to share their full journey publicly. So that combination of his credibility as a founder and the transparency is what his ICP specifically was actually looking for. And not only did we get clear on what his ICP was, but we studied them deeply. What are his ICP's pain points, their desires, their fears, etc. And by knowing this crucial information, you're able to know exactly what type of content you should be posting. Now, the next thing that we had to focus on was his brand messaging and positioning. So what exactly was going to make him different? And what I specifically mean by that is starting your own bucket. The thing is, when you copy creators completely, you're not building your own brand. All you're doing is filling in someone else's bucket who started that content style, right? And yes, you might be able to build a high converting audience off of this. And even I have some of my clients, use other people's content styles in order to gain traction with their content. But ultimately, all of the views, the likes, all of the engagement and money that you make it all gets credited back to the original person, right? So you just become the knockoff version of the original content style that you used. And you can see this with all of the monumental entrepreneurs in the space. Iman, TJR, Brez, they all went viral and they were able to build a huge audience because they created their own unique content styles. They innovated and created content styles that no one's ever seen before, which is what you need to understand. So when you build something genuinely unique, a style, a format, even an angle in a piece of content that no one else owns, you're able to start your own bucket. And the person who starts a trend or a content style always will get that credit forever, right? And everyone who comes after them is just following. So you need to understand what your wow factor is and what makes you unique. So how did we make Kevin's content unique? There's millions of stock investors, creators who post about the stock market. So what did we do to make it unique? So his unique angle of his display of losses and how he overcame them is really what differentiated him. Not that he only showed his wins, but that he also displayed his losses. So in his content, we made him talk about his full journey. Like I said, the losses, when he went all in on Ethereum and it crashed, leaving him to owe over $100,000 in taxes. When he touched 8 figures for 2 minutes in the stock market, 2 minutes, but his investment went right back down. And by, talking about and displaying all of these losses, it didn't make people think less of him, but it actually made him more unique and a greater authority because no one was doing this at the time. And another angle that we pushed heavily in his content is that investing is not as complicated as people make it out to be, right? You don't need to invest thousands of dollars in education to learn about the stock market. Because Kevin, he did not need to be a Wall Street veteran with thousands of analysts monitoring over his portfolio. It was literally just him, and all he needs to do is follow a simple strategy regardless of the wins/losses. He just stayed consistent to the strategy and he ultimately beat the game. So we reinforced this in his stories, his highlights, his carousels, his posts, and we made sure that transparency obviously lived and thrived throughout his content, right? So we obviously kept a running performance on his trades, his portfolio, his honest takes just in the market in general. And this meant that his most loyal audience always felt like they had a real time window into actually what he was doing with his money, right? So that level of access and connection between the viewer and Kevin is what really differentiated him, right? And in a space obviously full of gurus claiming to be rich with the stock market, someone that was actually willing to show their losses on camera like Kevin and update their network publicly in their bio is immediately gonna ultimately be the most credible person in the room. And that was really just Kevin's wow factor and differentiator. Now, heading into the actual roadmap of how we created this content, we'll start off with the content deep dive. So the first question you should ever ask when starting to post content is, what are the exact videos that my ICP is watching, right? So we looked at who they were following, what formats they were engaging with, what editing styles, what topics were making this specific type of person stop scrolling and actually engage. Now, a good way to think about why this matters so much is because let's say you're an agency owner who runs ads for service-based businesses, right? You shouldn't be making advanced, Miro board breakdowns and advanced content marketing framework videos, right? Because your ICP, the plumber, the roofer, the HVAC company, they have no idea what a Miro board is. These are older people. You're directing your content and your ICP is an older audience, right? Who probably doesn't care about these advanced video styles, right? So you need to be growing an audience by posting content that your ICP actually engages. And you need to be able to support that by looking at direct pages within your ICP and looking at their following list, what they're actually engaging with, etc. And this same kind of logic skewed for Kevin's ICP, right? Because the people who he wanted to target were more serious investors. These aren't people that want to watch crazy, flashy edits, right? They're watching clean, straightforward, incredible content, minimal editing, right? Just a clear delivery without having to go through and give their eyes a complete heart attack. What you guys need to understand is that more editing does not equal more views. And now the next thing we did was take a full inventory of every single piece of content that Kevin already had across the internet. So this included his podcast, his interviews, his B-roll, etc. And we also had him spend 30 minutes every single month creating talking head videos for top funnel and middle funnel content that would last him the next 30 days, right? Because we would obviously distribute it in a content strategy that worked well for his brand. And the main thing that was stopping Kevin, one of the main aspects that was stopping Kevin from scaling was because he lacked consistency. He didn't have the time to consistently post on Instagram. When we first hopped on that call and he showed me all of the podcasts, all of the B-roll footage, all of the footage and raw content in general that he had, I told him that we could just take over his entire content process. with him only having to spend 30 minutes every single month recording top funnel and middle funnel talking head content. Because the truth is, with short form, you don't need to be individually spending hours creating high quality content for each individual video. You find the style that attracts to your ICP, you take all of your existing long form content where you're already providing a ton of value, and you turn it into short form content that resonates with that ideal client. With all of the content that he provided with us, we were able to turn these longer videos into short form videos that followed our ANC process, basically just attract, nurture, and convert. So what did this strategy actually look like? So for his top funnel content, we basically just used his existing story in his B-roll, right? So we made montages and clips that showcased his journey going from $35,000 to 10 million, which was really captivating, and it helped us get a lot of initial traction. So we pulled this content from his podcast appearances and existing footage, and this top funnel content was about his losses and big wins/gains, and they're what created his unique bucket, which was his wow factor, and built a ton of trust. For his middle funnel content, we posted video of his trades, sharing his market takes and giving his honest opinion on what was happening in the space, right? So combined with the podcast clips we were already repurposing, this gave us a consistent flow of educational content that spoke directly to what his ICP wanted to learn. So we had clean, minimal editing, matching exactly the style that we saw was performing best with his audience. And finally, for the bottom of funnel content, this was content primarily him talking about his startup, right? And that's what your bottom funnel content should be, talking about exactly what you're selling and results that you generated with that, right? So we turned all of his interviews about his startup into clips that showed what he had built. Now, there were a ton of specific changes and bottlenecks that we needed to overcome, but just so I can keep these videos on the shorter end, I like to only narrow it down to a couple of the main aspects and changes that we made. So now I'm just gonna get right into the results that we generated. So in the first 60 days of running this system, we were able to scale his page from under 10,000 followers to over 20,000 followers, more than doubling his prior audience through solely organic reach. And keep in mind, most of his prior followers mainly just came from his other platforms just because they knew his name. And not only did we double his followers on Instagram, but we also traced over 5 million qualified views from his ICP, which has opened endless doors and opportunities for him, which I'll show you right now. He's been able to spread his journey and knowledge on over 10 podcasts. He's been recognized on news channels like Fox News and other companies. And most importantly, he's been able to grow AfterHour to over 200,000 registered users, so active traders that are actually using the app. And these aren't just new or unqualified investors registering for his app. There's over $400 million worth of connected portfolios. Now, this is it for this video. Now, if you are a founder, coach, or business owner looking to implement our done-for-you content systems for your business, just click the link in the description to apply. Peace out.